All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. We're recording, what day is it, Drew? We're recording on Tuesday afternoon. We're going to talk today about some early lines in the NFL. 49ers-Vikings off of the Niners Monday night triumph, Saints-Cowboys, and then preview Thursday night football, Bills-Dolphins. Let's start off with 49ers-Vikings. Niners are 6-point favorites. The total is 45.5, a scene of horrors of sorts for the Niners after they kind of imploded in Minnesota last season, albeit that was the Kirk Cousins show. What did you make of the Niners' performance overall on Monday night against the Jets? Is this just set to be the team that just kind of rolls through the NFC again and is tier one in the conference by themselves? Was there anything deeper to read into Monday night?
I would love to qualify it with if they stay healthy, but they are already dealing with a number of important issues, and it did not matter. I think it's pretty obvious and to everyone who's making numbers, this should be your number one power rated team in the NFL against the neutral. And I would, in general, expect that there is scope for this to go up. This is a team that we shouldn't forget was close 6-point favorites against the Ravens at home on Christmas. This was the team that closed meaningful favorite against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And, you know, while they didn't have Christian McCaffrey, they still had just as dynamic a rushing attack, which was largely a function of the Kyle Shanahan scheme, which is going nowhere. And I think ultimately this is, pretty clearly a team that will grow defensively as they get healthier. Didn't see Dre Greenlaw, didn't see Hufanga, didn't matter. And I think ultimately this is absolutely the team to beat in the NFC. Now their schedule is quite a lot harder than the Eagles, and the chances that they are ultimately able to get the 1 seed over the Eagles because of that differential is kind of the interesting story for me. Pretty clearly, there is a huge home field advantage playing in the playoffs at the Link, and if the Eagles can somehow eke out a 1 seed over the Niners, then that definitely changes the complexion a bit. But no, there's really no reason to doubt this Niners team whatsoever. Kyle Shanahan still clearly has his fastball in terms of scheme. The 3 wide receiver weapons they had out there looked absolutely dynamic. And then on top of that, you didn't even really need to use juice check and Kittle, but you did, and that worked. So that was a little bit of a shock as to how easily they exposed the Jets on Monday Night Football. And I look back, or at least I look towards this game where the Niners take on the Vikings as kind of an interesting exercise in how much did the head injury that Brock Purdy sustained in that game matter. He really was not executing at the level that we saw for most of the season last year after he got his bell rung in that Vikings game. And I think, the blitz in general is not something that I'm especially nervous about if I'm backing the Niners in this spot. And there are still pretty clearly obvious personnel limitations with the Minnesota Vikings defense, which I think are concerning. Now, my fare for this game would be under 6. We're currently looking at 6. I think I would make this, I think I would. I'm looking at my numbers now. I would make this more like a 4.5. But as I am licking my wounds, having just doubted the Niners, I think probably going to pass on this one.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I think it went a little bit under the radar because their box scores weren't amazing. But to me, the biggest thing out of Monday night's game, outside of the Jets defense looking very meek, was that I thought both quarterbacks looked incredible. I thought that Purdy was insanely good, and his stat line would have looked a lot more crisp had Brandon Ayuk come down with that ball in the right corner of the end zone, which he probably catches 90% of the time. And then Rodgers, I think he showed, is in stark contrast to Kirk Cousins, where the thing with Rodgers is he doesn't need to really plant his foot to throw the ball. He is all arm, and his arm looked great. So not worried about Rodgers at this point. I thought Purdy, that's when you adjust for the caliber of defense that he was allegedly playing, that's certainly one of the best performances of his career. I believe off the top of my head that Brock Purdy was either the first or second rated quarterback by PFF grade this week. And the number 1 guy, or the other guy in the top 2, was Sam Darnold, who he goes up against. How much do you read into Darnold's performance against the Giants? Is that a function of the Giants secondary just being horrific, the Giants being horrific overall, or do you think that there is scope that Darnold, with the best context of his career, the best play caller of his career, could make a meaningful leap?
That is the $1 million question. And I think having rewatched that game relatively recently, the pressure that the Giants front four was able to get, particularly up the middle, particularly from Dexter Lawrence, who's an all-pro, was meaningful. And Darnold handled it well. It didn't really feel like he was in any way, shape, or form the same quarterback who was, completely unable to handle pressure earlier in his career. And I think ultimately, while I don't disagree with you about Aaron Rodgers, I do think that the Nathaniel Hackett scheme was wanting last night. And I did think that Rodgers under pressure was a little underwhelming. So really all the Niners defense had going for them was getting some pressure. And if they are able to get some pressure against Darnold, well, not exactly worried about Darnold kind of matching scores here. So the bigger edge for me besides the side here is the total. I think 45.5 is quite low. The only adjustment I made for the Niners coming out of last night's game was the special teams number had to go up, because that was one phenomenal kicking display put on by Moody. And I think now being indoors, and again, just like a lot of freaking talent, raw speed, talent, ability to have some explosive plays in this game. I think this total should be 47. So I guess in a long way, like, I am believing that the Vikings are going to keep this game competitive. I am believing that Darnold is going to have a nice little stretch here at the beginning of the season where he proves to people that he needs to be taken seriously. And I think even if the Vikings only get to say 17 points or so in this game, I still think the total is about 1.5 too low.
Okay. Yeah, I think with it was obscured a little bit because the Jets just never had the ball. But when they did have the ball, they were moving it pretty well against the Niners defense. It was just that the Breece Hall fumble and then the interception really hurt them, and they just never had the ball. So still, I think some questions about the Niners, at least their pass defense. It just seems as someone who's frequently had money on the Niners the past 2 years, they just drop into these soft zone coverages so often. And it just felt like that was there for Rodgers frequently. Their run defense at least looked much improved from the bottom 10 unit that it was last season. Any other angles on this game before we move on? Were you worried about what the Niners defense showed against the Jets, or was that basically par?
No, that was kind of what I was expecting. I guess the two wrinkles were, it felt like the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, you look at his spray chart of his targets, it was all left side of the field. Either they were specifically avoiding Charvarius Ward, or Charvarius Ward was doing such a nice job of coverage on the right that there was no ability to target over there. But either way, that's interesting from the matchup of Justin Jefferson standpoint, because if Ward is truly a CB 1.01 kind of talent, then that's going to be a matchup worth watching. I know Addison is dealing with some injuries, no Hawkinson then in this game, and if we hadn't seen some flashes of signs of life from Naylor and a little bit of chemistry with Darnold, then that would spook me a little bit. But all that said, short week for the Niners. Haven't mentioned that. Difficult place to play in general early in the season. Real deal home field advantage for the Vikings in the dome there, and I think this should be probably one of the better games of the week.
Yep, I agree. Purdy v. Darnold, blockbuster. I think one last thing before we move off of the Niners, and because I think the thing with going into week 2 is that we're so biased by what we've seen and not knowing how to adjust for opponent yet. Like, we have this idea that the Jets are, an elite top 5, top 7 defense, but what if they're just not this season? Like, defense is hugely variable season to season. And I think if you ask most Jets fans, they would tell you that their concerns coming into the year about the defense were question marks about the run defense and question marks about the pass rush. It's like, well, if you've got question marks about run defense and pass rush, you got questions about the defense in general. Everyone's very comfortable with the secondary, but if there's not the pass rush to complement it, and if you can't stop the run, even though it's coming play after play like they did on Monday night, then it could be a little bit worse than expected. Still think they'll be a good defense, but perhaps not the all-world units that people hope they would be. But the season is still young. All right. Dominate this NFL season with a Fantasy Life Plus subscription. Get weekly rankings, start-sit advice, DFS analysis, and betting tools. Use promo code season20 for 20% off. Go to fantasylife.com/rotoworld to learn more. All right, New Orleans Saints at Dallas Cowboys, two teams that covered the spread by a monstrous amount. I think in terms of just the difficulty kind of just in one's head adjusting for how good or bad the opponent was especially stark really in both of these cases. I think the Saints are perhaps the more confusing team where they probably came into the season as like the definition of a team that you would expect to be slightly under 500, than 8-9, 7-10 type of team. And then they looked, again, difficult to adjust for context, but they looked phenomenal against the Panthers. O-line was the big question. That held up, albeit not up against a frightening pass rush. Defense was always expected to be pretty good and against not much in Bryce Young, but still completely wrecked the game. Do you think this is a strange line after the Cowboys were 2.5-point dogs in Cleveland, now flipped to being 6.5-point favorites at home over the Saints?
Well, the Cleveland line is the one that I feel like is like still scratching my head over what in the world was going on there. The look ahead here was 6. We saw some initial enthusiasm that pushed this from 6 to 7, and now it's come back to 6.5. I generally feel like this is one of those games where people see what the Cowboys did. They're like, "Ah, man, we really did throw them cold water on them way too soon. They're perfectly healthy. Like that defense was just absolutely violent, and they generated more pressures than I think some teams will have through 3 weeks this year. And I think that's kind of the key matchup that a lot of people need to digest for this particular game. One of the more surprising ratings for units, I would say, in week 1 was the New Orleans Saints offensive line. This was a unit that overall I think a lot of people had penciled in as bottom 5. Certainly everyone I think had penciled in as bottom 10. Huge questions marks about the tackle situation. You had youth and guys that had really not proven that they can do it at the NFL level, bookending your offensive line there. And there were some questions that, Derek Carr has typically performed poorly when under pressure. That was sort of the bear case for the Saints in general. And the defensive line for the Panthers lost their 1v1 so substantially that you either take that as this is one of the worst defensive lines we've ever seen, or you have to say we have to upgrade the Saints O-line. And depending on how much you move the needle on that specific question tells you whether you should be backing the Saints in this contest or taking the Cowboys, because the preseason prior for the Saints O-line with this matchup tells you Derek Carr is in deep trouble. And the defense for the Saints is good, but not good enough to completely bottle CeeDee Lamb. I think in general, the offensive line for the Cowboys, we saw them come together in the preseason. There was a lot of positive buzz and reports about the chemistry and the way that they were playing, and they showed it against a very, very tough test. This is a much easier test. You're at home. The Saints really can't generate much of a pass rush, and I would say that all of the advantages here really tick in favor of the Cowboys. Now, if you do believe that the Saints offensive line is better than was previously worried about, Trevor Penning really can play as a pro tackle, then I got great news for you. The total in this game has been bet up, but is still under the key of 47. So realistically, if the Cowboys defense is as effective in generating pressure as they were against Deshaun Watson and the Browns on Sunday, then this is pretty clearly Cowboys cover and under. If the Saints O-line plays as well as they did Sunday against the meek Carolina Panthers, then this thing probably cooks well over 45.5 and maybe an opportunity to take Saints plus the points. But right now I haven't made a bet on this game because I really am waiting for a little bit more consensus about what was going on with the Saints offensive line. You had an opinion there?
Well, I think with the Saints O-line, even though you had to project before the season like a median outcome that, they're very bad, there was at least upside because they have Eric McCoy at center, who's one of the best centers in the league. And then they have three young first-round picks still on the line in Penning, Ruiz, and Fuaga. And so there was upside there. It's not like the Giants O-line last year where there's just no scope to get good because there's just no talent on the team if Andrew Thomas is injured. And so, look, it's one game against the Carolina Panthers, but Fuaga and Penning both look good. And if you have two, like they were first-round picks for like the past 2 years. So if those guys are just good at tackle and are what they were drafted to be as first-round picks, it's not like they were like the 30th pick either. I think Fuaga went 14 and Penning went, I want to say, like late 10s. So if those guys just have made leaps forward and you have two really good tackles and a really good center, then all of a sudden it's just a good offensive line. And so I think that when you combine that with Derek Carr, who is very maligned, I think there's a good chance that Derek Carr is the best quarterback in his division, which isn't saying a great deal given that Bryce Young plays in that division and represents 25% of the quarterbacks in said division. But Derek Carr, when he is upright and when he has time, is a perfectly serviceable quarterback. And then you have Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, who are two of the more exciting and dynamic young receivers in the game. Certainly Olave has elite scope, and Shaheed has a ton of upside. And then Jawan Johnson is a very solid tight end. Like there are pieces on the offense to make you believe that it could actually be good. Yeah. And the defense is really solid last year. So I think there are definitely worlds where the Saints are like an 11-6 division winner. I'm not sure about like their scope, their like upside beyond that. But I think the concern for them in this matchup is it's been years since the New Orleans Saints had a pass rush. And if you don't have a pass rush against the Cowboys in Dallas, then I think that Dak with CD with another week, under his belt, the Cowboys are probably going to light them up. But what do you think about like the hypothesis that the Saints offense could just be good if this O-line, if they've hit on these, or if these young tackles have gotten better?
I mean, we talk about like what qualifies as like a bellwether game. Like this is it.
Yep.
There is one like bona fide cornerback on the field for the Cowboys. And if you can, neutralize the pressure, then you should be able to have opportunities to have explosive plays in the passing game. I will say there's one other thing besides just the quality of grades from the players themselves for the Saints. Kubiak, who has taken over play calling duties, was a breath of fresh air in terms of hand in glove fitting what Carr does well compared to what we saw last year with Carmichael. So this was a pretty obvious visual upgrade just in terms of offensive functionality. And while Kubiak is this is not his first rodeo. Like he's got a couple stops now, and he might not ultimately be able to elevate this overall offense to top 10. This is a perfect opportunity for him to prove it, because you should be able to find ways to attack the second level of this Cowboys defense via Shaheed, via your tight ends room, which is looking quite strong. Foster Moreau probably not going to play. Tough to kind of get a good read on how serious his injury is, but Jawan Johnson looked ready to go. And just in general, like the fact that the Saints offense wasn't 14 screen passes to Alvin Kamara was a humongous sigh of relief watching that game.
Yeah, and I don't want to overreact too much because like Trevor Penning and Talizi Fuaga going up against, 31-year-old Jadeveon Clowney and Iku Leota. It's different when you go up against Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and like defense. So let's see how they hold up. But certainly encouraging signs. I think the Saints, who came in as the most nondescript team in football, there's a very real chance that this team hosts a playoff game, for better or worse, but we'll see. I'm excited to see how the Cowboys defense goes up, how they look, missing Deron Bland, relying on a rookie corner, relying on just a lot of youth across the board, how they go against, in a dome against a proper NFL quarterback, which they did not get in Cleveland.
Yes.
So everyone kind of saying like, oh, the Cowboys, everyone wrote them off in the offseason and they're fine because they blew out the Browns. Like, well, let's see how they go the next 2 weeks against New Orleans and Baltimore, because those are going to be I think, stand a test than whatever Deshaun Watson was doing on Sunday. All right, it's a matchup between two of the brightest young quarterbacks in week 2 on Sunday night. Watch Caleb Williams and the Bears face off with CJ Stroud and the Texans in Houston. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock.
As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up to BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code BETEDGE. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code BETEDGE when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE and get your $1,500 first bet offer today.
Okay, let's close out, talk about Thursday night football. Bills at Dolphins, a game that seems vastly overqualified for the Thursday night slot. The Dolphins are 2-point favorites. That is trickling towards 2.5 some spots. The total is 49 flat. This is a matchup that the Bills in recent vintage have dominated, but they are not perhaps the overwhelming force that they looked to be at the start of last season or the year prior when they were flirting with favoritism to win the Super Bowl. Do you agree with this line that implies that these teams are basically very close to dead even on neutral, accounting for the fact that the Bills may be at a slight disadvantage playing on the road on a short week?
Boy, that's kind of the X factor, because for me the Bills are better, and the Bills should be small favorites here. The injuries, I guess, are maybe the most important thing to care about this time of year because it is such a short week in terms of recovery. Devin Achane and Mostert both DNP'd again today, so it looks likely to be down to RB3, RB4. Now, granted, those guys are still talented, so it's not like. And by the way, guys who you have never heard of can apparently rush for 140 yards on a moment's notice in prime time. So, in a system that's similar to Shanahan. So, I think ultimately the hand injury to Josh Allen scared me for a minute out of betting this game. He, if you didn't see it, did something to his left hand and will likely be either taped up or wearing a glove. This was on his last rushing touchdown, I believe. And I think the matchup between these two teams has always very clearly tilted in favor of Buffalo, particularly with their offense against the Dolphins defense from a skill position, just from a talent standpoint. And I, one of my maybe I think it was my favorite game last year that I watched and bet aggressively was the Bills at the Dolphins week 4, where they were relative dogs in a game where they were absolutely able to just pick on the nickelback for the Dolphins all day long. And I look at the Dolphins defense as vulnerable still. They were able to generate more pressure against the Jacksonville Jaguars than I had assumed that they were. But for my money, the best offensive line performance of any team in week 1 was the Bills. I think this Bills offensive line is extremely strong. I think they're going to be able to afford Josh Allen lots of time. And I think Josh Allen definitely has shown that, he can get it done with whoever you put him out there with in terms of targets. Josh Allen is unstoppable in the red zone. So, the idea that the Bills end this season with the most prolific red zone efficiency among any offense, I believe it. I think that's completely reasonable. And then on the other side of the ball, the Bills defense played very conservatively against the Cardinals. That dictated a lot of the game script that they found themselves in as they were down, early in that contest. And I think, the conservative defense against the Dolphins is probably the right approach, because the Dolphins offense was quite boom or bust. It was, really fueled by just a couple of big plays, which are, if you take those out of the equation, you didn't see kind of smooth, efficient, matriculating offense, which is what the Bills are going to demand that they do. So Teron Johnson out for the Bills at nickelback matters. However, I still think that the two other guys who were out there covering were outstanding in week one. Rasul Douglas still has it, and Christian Benford has taken a huge step forward as far as a coverage guy for this secondary, and the Bills can just flat out cover. They are weak at linebacker and safety. But again, if you kind of know that and you're playing your defense conservatively to protect those parts of your unit, then I don't know that there's a huge advantage for the Dolphins in that head to head there. So it's probably silly to bet this game because of the short week and all the uncertainty. But I'm on the Bills here on the money line. I think that I'm fine kind of staking this one in the hopes that Josh Allen continues his red zone dominance. And I'm fine staking this one in the hopes that the Dolphins continue their elite team matchup futility. The next time they beat a good team in the prime time feels like it's going to be the first team.
Yeah, that's basically right. I think they probably should have lost at home to the Jags, which is not ideal, although I think the Jags will be solid this year. I'm just a little bit worried that I think the Bills might be a bit inflated by the fact that the Cardinals are probably vying with the Commanders to have the worst defense in football, and they just had they just had nothing against the Bills, and the Bills moved the ball at will outside of turnovers. So that would be my concern for Buffalo, is that we just haven't gotten a gauge on this new Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid, who did nothing against Arizona this era, and how it looks. I think as well that a lot of the flaws that kind of Miami showed on defense, mainly just Jalen Ramsey getting roasted, which has kind of happened a lot more frequently in the past year than it had previously, as he gets a little bit older and has been dealing with knee injuries and is having to commit DPI in the end zone to get by. And I think he'll probably have an easier time against Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. I think it's promising for the Dolphins that Jalen Phillips looked good. And in terms of the Achilles guys, you would rank it Aaron Rodgers 1, Jalen Phillips 2, Kirk Cousins 27. So I think that is, because that was kind of the big question mark about the pass rush with the Dolphins, is with Chubb out, with Phillips coming off the Achilles, Calais Campbell, what does he have left? Well, Campbell and Phillips both look pretty good. So I think that is encouraging. I'm a little bit worried for my man, Damar Hamlin, going up against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. That's not ideal. I think the back end of the Bills defense is a bit of a concern, and also their linebacking core. I mean, to your point, maybe it's just really conservative and they're playing back. I'm not sure you can play far enough back, though, with those guys going up against Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. So, I think the line is fair. I think the Bills in these matchups previously have just kind of physically just ragdolled the Dolphins. Think back to the early season matchup last year in Buffalo in particular, where it just didn't seem like the Dolphins belonged on the same field. And that was kind of emphasized with the difference of how Tua plays in his finesse game versus just, Josh Allen eating planets. So I don't really have a strong lean on this game. I think that the Bills offense is going to look a little bit worse. But overall, I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched.
Yeah, I do want to mention that the hottest bet in this game in the market to this point in the cycle has been the under. And I completely agree directionally with this move. We saw high conviction in the under in the Buffalo-Arizona game that I disagreed with. But it appeared that there were seeds of that was reasonable. And the seeds were Buffalo ran one of the least aggressive offenses that I have seen in a long time with the lead against that Arizona team. They really, and this has been a staple of Sean McDermott since he's really had the keys. And Joe Brady, his defenses down the stretch his offenses down the stretch last year were kind of in the same vein. Like, they really are not interested in, padding a lead and getting a comfortable W, it feels like, for whatever reason. And, if they take the air out of the ball in the second half of this game with a lead, I don't think we should be surprised. If Greg Rousseau utilizes his advantageous matchup against a weak O-line for the Dolphins, we could see a pretty healthy amount of pressure on Tua. And while Tua has handled that generally well in the primetime games under the lights, has been where it's been the most obvious that he is kind of aware of it. So I'm fascinated to see Ed Oliver and Rousseau really against this this O-line for the Dolphins, where I have some serious questions. So I'm kind of keen on getting more information about really the ability of the Dolphins to run less explosive, more efficient, more kind of cross the street 20 times type of offense, because that's what they're going to have to do, I think, to go score for score with the Bills in this one. And obviously it might not even be score for score. It might just be, kind of special teams executions that tilts this one way or the other. But this has been bet down from 51.5 to, looks like it's trending 48 to me.
Yep. I think what you mentioned about the Bills D-line is pertinent, because between Rousseau, who was a monster with 3 sacks against the Cardinals, albeit up against the not great O-line, though he's not going up against a great O-line this time either in Miami. Between Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Von Miller was solid. Von Miller had a better game against the Cardinals than he probably had all last regular season. And I think that kind of adds credence to the idea that Von Miller, a year further removed from his knee injury, is going to be at least like a useful rotational edge rusher, which he wasn't last year. Last year, he's a negative player. So overall, I think that this should be a pretty solid D-line. And so I think that a lot of the bull case for the Bills in this game is that they just kind of dominate in the trenches. And I think the bull case for the Dolphins is that the back end of the Bills, that Hamlin and Rapp, and to a less, I think Douglas and Christian Benford are perfectly fine, but are they going to be able, with that back end, to be able to contain Tyreek and Jalen Waddle? Probably not, but we'll see. I think the other thing too is that I think we maybe are a little bit biased by the fact that 2 of the last 3 times that these teams have matched up, Tyreek Hill has been on one ankle, where he was not right in the Week 18 matchup, at least I thought so, against the Bills, to decide the division last season. And then I think the previous matchup, from memory, I can't remember if it was an ankle or a hamstring, but he was hobbled in that snow game towards the end of the 2022 season. So that would be
at least he has no distractions this time on a short week. He's got nothing to do but prep for this game.
Yes. Indeed. A lot of won't dive into the Tyreek Hill content, but anyway, it should be fully focused on the football, as we always are. All right, don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel, and if you're listening to us in podcast form, don't forget to rate and subscribe. Also, a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From myself and Drew, we'll see you soon.